We ready? Okay. Okay, so then we do have a few questions. Some have come from online, and then there are some that I anticipated that I think would be useful to include in this series during the Q&A session. And that is, let's see, let me just take these up one by one. Did Jesus raise himself from the dead? The answer is yes, according to the scriptures. He did. And let me give you some passages on that. In fact, the Bible teaches that the Father was involved in the resurrection, the Holy Spirit was involved in the resurrection of Jesus, and Jesus raised himself from the dead. Let me start with the last one. John chapter 2, verse 19. Jesus answered and said to them, "Destroy this temple, and in 3 days I will raise it up." And in context, he explains that the temple that he's referring to is the temple of his body. So in John chapter 2, verse 19, when he says, "Destroy this temple," he's talking about his body. In 3 days, that would be after being in the tomb for 3 days, he says, "I will raise it up." So the answer to that is yes, he did raise himself. And also John chapter 10, verse 18, Jesus said, "No one takes it from me, but I lay it down of myself. I have power to lay it down, and I have power to take it again. This command I received from my Father." So, yes, Jesus did raise himself from the dead. And further, the Bible also teaches that the Father raised him from the dead. Galatians chapter 1, verse 1, "Paul, an apostle, not from men nor through man, but through Jesus Christ and God the Father, who raised him from the dead." And then the Holy Spirit was involved. 1 Peter chapter 3, verse 18. "For Christ also suffered once for sins, the just for the unjust, that he might bring us to God, being put to death in the flesh, but made alive by the Spirit." And the Greek there is pneumati. That is, it looks like that's what we call a dative means. That is, by means of the Spirit. So all three of the Godhead were involved. Now, how that can be, that gets back into the question of the nature of the Trinity. Maybe we can have another seminar sometime on the nature of the Trinity. But for sure, the Bible teaches that all three were involved took a part or did raise him from the dead. Another question has to do with the matter of people not believing. We try to persuade people, go around with the gospel of Christ and give them this evidence, but not everybody believes. But that does not necessarily reflect that we have not done our job. I mean, in Matthew 7, 13, 14, the Bible teaches that Jesus said that, in essence, that many will go to heaven and only a few are going to find this narrow way to him, but broad is the way that leads to destruction, and many are they that go in there by. So we should not be thinking that success is in proclaiming the gospel and doing our job in the Great Commission is somehow not people not responding 100% is somehow a bad reflection on us. Expect that many are not going to receive it. And that also gets into the question of what causes people to believe things. There was a very helpful article written by this person was an agnostic, if not an atheist, what he had to say, because we'll take truth wherever we can find it, right? And Walter Kaufman, Kaufmann, M-A-N-N, Walter Kaufman, in his book Critique of Religion and Philosophy, on page 132 and following, talks about 7 causes of belief. One of them is rational. In other words, you present evidence to people, and the truth seeker will respond to it favorably. But People do not believe things only based upon proper reasoning. There are other factors that can cause belief. He lists several and discusses them. One might be, say, a Muslim who wants you to be converted and has a gun to your child and says, I'll believe or I'll kill your child. Coercion belief, maybe. Or maybe somebody believes because of what I call osmosis. That is, they're surrounded by a particular worldview and they accept it uncritically, and that becomes their worldview. It's not that they've made a honest and careful analysis of the data, of the facts, but since this is what everybody believes, then I'm going to believe it. Another possible cause of belief would be, well, if I believe that, then grandmother is not in heaven. And I don't want to believe that, so therefore I'm not going to accept it. I mean, there are different causes of belief. Only one of the 7 that he lists is rational belief, is 1 Thessalonians 5:21 belief. So that's also a factor. Let's not base our success upon the numbers of people that respond favorably, but we should do our best. We don't know who's going to respond and who isn't, therefore we should go into all the world and preach the gospel and let God give the increase. One of the factors involved in conversion is beyond our control, namely choice, will. Do they want the truth? And God himself has chosen not to control that. So if a person loves the truth, on the other hand, I believe that God will provide the opportunity for that person to hear and obey the truth. I base that on Proverbs 8:17, which says, this is God's wisdom personified. In that chapter 8 of the book of Proverbs, in verse 17, it says, I love those who love me, and those who seek me diligently will find me. But they have to seek him diligently. And then over in 2 Thessalonians 2:10-12, the Bible talks about having a love for the truth. If a person loves the truth, then you do not run the risk of the caution in that passage. But if you do not love the truth, God himself is capable of sending a deluding influence. The antidote to that is to love the truth, want the truth. And if a person is a truth seeker, then I believe that they will respond favorably. Another one is, if Jesus' true nature was divine and separate from the material world, was the crucifixion and resurrection simply symbolic or an illustration of escaping the physical realm rather than an historical event? No, I believe that the Bible clearly teaches that it was a literal bodily resurrection. Let me just call this to your attention. In the book of Luke, for example, which says, this is talking about Jesus' appearance to his disciples. 20:36 says, now as they said these things, Jesus himself stood in the midst of them and said to them, peace to you. They were terrified and frightened and supposed they had seen a spirit. And he said to them, why are you troubled? And why do doubts arise in your hearts? Verse 39 of Luke 24, behold, look, my hands and my feet, that it is I myself. Handle me and see, for a spirit does not have flesh and bones as you see I have. So this is a physical resurrection. It was not a non-physical with some symbolic reason. It was a literal physical resurrection portrayed in the scriptures. And then one last note that I have here is a question. How do you reconcile the resurrection account describing a physical Jesus with passages that emphasize spiritual transformation, like 1 Corinthians 15:44? So Luke 24:39 says, behold my hands and my feet, handle me, for a spirit does not have flesh and bones as you see I have. So it's clearly, when he was raised from the dead, it was a physical body that could be sense experienced, touched, seen. But how do you reconcile that with what 1 Corinthians 15:44 says? So 15:44, 1 Corinthians 15:44 reads, "It is sown a natural body," and this is talking about the resurrection of everybody. "It is sown a natural body, it is raised a spiritual body. There is a natural body and there is a spiritual body." So the question is, however, the spiritual is not first, but the natural, and afterward the spiritual. So I understand the question be asking, well, you have evidence that Jesus, when he was raised from the dead, was raised in his physical body, which is detectable by the senses, was present. But yet over in 1 Corinthians 15, it says we're going to be raised in a spiritual body. Of course, that spiritual body in 1 Corinthians 15 is a changed body. It's not the spirit in the sense of it's not like this. It's not this kind of a body, right? It's an eternal body that I believe comprises the spirit who has returned, that is returned and joined to the resurrected body. But this is an interesting question. One possible answer to this is that when he was raised, it was a physical, literal body. There's no question about that. The Bible teaches that. And it wasn't perhaps until later when he ascended back into heaven, somewhere in between, that change may have taken place. 1 Corinthians 15 does talk about a change. And then there is another question that came up, and that is, a couple of things. Since all have seen him, since all who have seen him resurrected from death, are we not blessed because we believe even though we have not seen? And yes, there's a wonderful passage that talks about that very thing. Take a look at John chapter 20, verse 29. John 20, verse 29. Here in this context we have Jesus appearing to the apostles. Remember, in that context, Thomas is doubting it. He's not accepting their testimony. And then Jesus appears again before Thomas, and he says, "Now, thrust here your hand," and so forth. And then Thomas says, my Lord and my God." Right? So, but notice what Jesus says in between, in John chapter 20, verse 29. Jesus said to him, "Thomas, because you have seen me," that is, because you have since experienced me, "you have believed." That is, you have believed because you're basing it upon having touched me physically. But then it says, "Blessed or happy are those who have not seen and yet have believed." That's us. Here he's looking down the corridor of time and saying, also, those of us who did not actually witness and sense experience the resurrected Christ also are justified in believing that he was raised from the dead. And what is that based upon? Well, in context, he's rebuking Thomas. He's saying it's a good thing that you believe based upon sense experience, but it is not a good thing that you did not believe based upon reliable testimony of the apostles who told you that they had seen the resurrected. You should have accepted that reliable testimony. Similarly, we today, though we do not physically see the resurrected Christ or since experience him, we have reliable testimony here. And because of that, John 20, verse 29, we are justified in believing that he actually was raised from the dead. Thank you, everybody, for all of that. Calvin, am I being recorded now? I'm off.
Yes. I can say a few